Welcome to the Modern Gothic Cinema Podcast. I'm your host, Pitar Kluich. Our podcast likes to reflect on contemporary works of Gothic cinema, be it conventional or unconventional. Today's film is a bit in the middle. The film we'll talk about today is the 2016 psychological thriller, The Handmaiden. The Handmaiden was directed by the South Korean director Park Chan-wook. Park is probably South Korea's second most popular filmmaker, behind Bong Joon-ho, director of last year's Best Picture winner Parasite. Some of the other films that Park has directed include the Vengeance trilogy, including the infamous Oldboy, one of the most shocking and meticulously crafted films you'll ever see. Another film of his I've seen is Thirst, but Handmaiden was a film that I've heard about for years and had meant to watch for a while. This podcast gave me the perfect reason. At the surface, this film seemed gothic to me, and upon viewing it, it's fairly evident it could be considered a modern gothic film. It touches on a multitude of aspects, including its heavily gothic atmosphere, its characters, and its romance. We'll also connect this film to previous gothic works, including Le Fanu's Carmilla and Malesky's essay, The Female Uncanny. Handmaiden is a heavily layered film, mainly due to its three-part structure, with scenes from the first and second intertwining and being shown in a different perspective. Also, there are quite some plot twists on the way, so there's a lot of summarizing to do. But the premise of the film is a con artist who looks to swindle a rich and vulnerable upper-class lady with the help of a colleague, convincing the lady to marry the man. If you haven't seen this film and you're looking to watch it, now's the time to turn the podcast off, because going forward, there are a lot of spoilers. So listen at your own risk. To simply summarize this film, the titular handmaiden falls in love with the woman she is to protect and take care of, but also the original plan was to actually just swindle her. So it's about how they deal with that situation, the romance, how they deal with the con man, how they deal with the uncle of the lady. Ultimately, the film ends with them together. A lot of stuff happens in between. The three-part structure lays it out in a non-linear format at times, and it's a very, very beautifully crafted film. If you've seen it, you would know, and if you haven't, I'd recommend you see it, because I truly can't explain the plot, because there's just so much going on, but the gothic themes in the film were very evident to me, and a little bit surprising. But now I'll explain to you exactly where the gothic elements are and how they blossom in this film. Firstly, as I said earlier, the atmosphere. The mansion setting for most of the film has a very gloomy, dreadful feeling, that it oozes. And even the intro scene of the film kind of gives you a vibe that, something isn't right, something, like a real feeling of suspense. And of course, in Gothic literature, Gothic cinema, that feeling of suspense is a staple. Another thing which I said is very Gothic are the characters. As I've partially mentioned, Hideko, she's lonely. She's never experienced love. She's actually being forced to marry someone she doesn't love. One being her uncle. Her uncle is looking to marry her too in order to gain her inheritance. And then Fujihara comes around. He wants to marry her for her inheritance. So she's just being forced to marry somebody she doesn't love. She's already cast away, just literally reading books, which is then revealed she's actually reading pornographic novels that her uncle can host, like, live readings to, like, other horny rich guys. So she's just like a classic damsel in distress. Like, there's lots of her expression of fear and her expression of directionless throughout the film. And then also Suki also has a little bit of that distress aspect to her character too, in that she's been forced to live a life of conning. She's in poverty, and then she eventually falls in love with the person she's supposed to swindle, gets betrayed, and literally left to die in an asylum from her colleague. Of course, that changes. And then also the toxic male characters are also very, very evident in this film, with Fujihara, who of course is trying to scam Hideko and to just get her money. He betrays Suki. in the process. Of course, he doesn't actually love Hideko, so he's just really pulling the ultimate con simply for money. And then there's the uncle Kazuki, who Hideko lives with. He actually killed Hideko's aunt. Hideko's aunt is her blood aunt, and he lives with her now. Literally forced her to live a life of reading pornographic novels, and now is trying to marry her for control of her assets. It's like, that's quite the prototypical soul-sucking male antagonist in both of those characters. And then another aspect is the passionate romance in this film. The romance between Hideko and Suki, it's one of the driving forces in the film, and it comes in an unexpected place, which actually is where I wanted to connect this film to Le Fanu's Carmilla, in that it's a lesbian romance that develops from a newcoming inhabitant. In Carmilla, it's Carmilla entering Laura's life. In The Handmaiden, it's Suki entering Hideko's life. Another aspect of Carmilla, I'd say, is dark secrets from these lovers. In Carmilla, it's the secret that she's, actually a vampire. And then in Handmaiden, it's Suki and Hideko were trying to swindle each other. Those are some pretty dark secrets between people who love each other. Another connection to Carmilla, I'd say, is the hidden ominous location. In the end of the tomb in Carmilla, they find where they stab her and kill her. And then also there's another hidden location in The Handmaiden that I didn't previously mention, which is the basement in the mansion. It's where the uncle had actually chopped up the aunt and tortured her. It's kind of like his weird torture chamber kind of thing that he has going on. That is also another driving force of fear for Hideko of her uncle. And then also is sort of the ends kind of parallel in that the protagonist overcomes the antagonists and the trauma from them, and they kind of ride off into sunset for recovery. That being Mercala being executed, and then Laura and her dad taking a trip to Italy in hopes of some sort of recovery of this trauma. And then in Handmaiden, Suki and Hideko successfully swindle the count, leave him for dead, and then escape to Shanghai together at the end of the film. And then also I'd say there's some connection to Modleski's work of The Female Uncanny, in that there's that continued dread, anxiety, fearfulness that we see portrayed from Hideko. She's literally being left to live with her uncle and all the trauma that he's given her over the years, which is heavily revealed in part 2, including the killing of her aunt. And also, Hideko's lack of understanding of men and her urge to understand romance is heavily seen in the film, which is also touched upon in The Female Uncanny. Another part, of course, is previously mentioned, the prototypical toxic male figures, which is creating these traumatized female characters. But ultimately, in this case, The Handmaiden, we get to see the transformation from fear into love for both Hideko and for Suki, which is another concept of literature that we see talked about in Female Uncanny, of going from love into fear and fear into love. In the case of The Handmaiden, it's fear into love. And Handmaiden is truly a beautiful piece of cinema. I'm a big movie buff, and I've watched maybe 125 films. I think 122 according to my Letterboxd this year. And I'd say Handmaiden is probably my top 10 or 15 favorites amongst the new films I've watched this year. From the Park Chan-wook films I've seen, it's definitely my favorite. Might be the best South Korean film that I've seen, alongside with The Wailing, which is a great horror film. Fortunately not Gothic, I would say, but a great film nonetheless. But in conclusion, The Handmaiden, I would say, passes the test of a modern Gothic cinema work in its comparisons to Carmilla and The Female Uncanny. I definitely recommend you check out The Handmaiden, and if you have, let me know what your thoughts are on my comparisons. Thank you for listening, everybody, and have a wonderful night.